it's Harriet. I wanted to stop by today and do a video for Asthma and Allergy Awareness Month. In this video, I wanted to talk about my personal experience as my own, not my kids, not anyone else's, but my own personal experience with asthma and allergies. So what many people may not know is that prior to becoming a certified asthma educator and being an allergy advocate and food allergy coach and allergy mom, I have been the asthma patient, allergy patient myself. I was diagnosed with asthma at 18 months old. I almost had a tracheotomy at that time. I spent most of my childhood in and out of the hospital. I was prednisone dependent from age 4 to 12, meaning that I needed to take oral steroids every single day. Nothing else worked. I was on drugs called theophylline, made me hyper. I was a pilot for many drugs like Intal and theophyline's counterpart Slowbid, in addition to taking prednisone. I was an asthmatic at a time that they were just really trying to figure out what was going on, I think. And they didn't have this sharp rise that we see now. I remember being intense in the hospital. They would put you like in this plastic tent to keep the humidity and steam. And the interesting thing is that my asthma attacks were always treated with epinephrine until I was 13 years old, or almost 12. I mean, after 12. I would have attacks almost weekly. I did have skin tests and blood tests. I did have a long list of so-called allergies, but even removing them from my diet did not make a difference. There would be many of a Friday night that my parents would have to call my pediatrician to open up, and I grew up in New York City, but I was lucky he was across the street. And he would have to give me multiple shots of epinephrine and another drug called cephalosporin. At that time, they didn't always push you to the hospital. They would just give you. It was not an EpiPen. It was drawn up. I would live like this almost weekly. When I would get a cold, obviously everything else would be worse, and I would be sick for a much longer period of time and really struggle to breathe. And trust me, that struggle to breathe is a struggle. My parents tried everything. My mom dust-proofed the house. They bought ionizers. They took me to multiple specialists. They kept trying to find a way to control my asthma. And one of the things that I always tell people, because there is this belief that you can always control asthma. You can't always control asthma. Like, it does sometimes, nothing works. And I happen to have been one of those cases when I was younger. So I didn't do gym. I was not a physically active kid because, I had asthma. I couldn't run. There were no medication administration forms, so my mom had to advocate and work with the school principal to kind of illegally store my nebulizer in the school. My school didn't have a full-time nurse all the time. I mean, this was the mid-'80s, early '90s. We didn't have that I went to school in the '80s. It just didn't exist. My mom was very good about, teaching everyone about what I might say. And I was very clear about what I always would describe it, like my chest is tight or my chin itches or my back itches. In middle school, I had more problems. And when I was in 7th grade, when I was 12, we don't know to this day what happened. I do know someone set off a smoke bomb, which was these disgusting sulfur bombs. And I just remember walking in the street. I had gone home early, but I walked in the street with my friend, and suddenly I couldn't breathe. And so we went to my allergist, who gave me a bunch of shots of Epi. It kind of worked, and then sent me home after a couple hours. And then I went to sleep, and then a few hours later, I couldn't breathe again. And I went to the pediatrician, who gave me more Epi. And finally said I had to go to the ER because the epi wasn't working. I just kind of remember passing out in triage, and I was intubated and in a medical coma for 4 days from that. To this day, I don't know what triggered that. My lung did partially collapse, which is interesting. From that caused a shift in my asthma care, and we went to see a pulmonologist who basically got me off everything. I was able to get finally off oral prednisone. Unfortunately, the trade-off was that every time I got a cold for the ages of the end of, from like after that bad attack for 13, 14, 15, until I was 16, every time I was getting sick, I ended up in the hospital. And it wasn't just like go to the ER, it was always an admission. They did not treat me with epi anymore. They would do round-the-clock nebulizers instead. And I do mean round-the-clock nebulizers. And that was how it kind of continued until I was 16. Obviously, when you get older, you mature, you hit puberty and things like that, sometimes asthma gets better. So in my case, there were better medications on the market. I started taking inhalated corticosteroids like Asthmacort. And I was able to get off all the other ones. I wasn't taking theophylline I was still on Intal. I did try a lot of these medications that are now out. Like I was on Ceravent when they were piloting it. So when I hit my mid-teens, my asthma seemed to gain better control. And by the time I was in college, it did not seem environmentally triggered anymore, which was great. But it was still virally induced. And if I got a cold, unfortunately, to this very day, if I get a cold, I have no choice but to go on prednisone pretty much. Colds go right to my chest. I start having trouble breathing. The mucus becomes very thick and hard for me to clear, and I get tight and I start struggling. So that still stays with me. But I will say, I remember in college, my background's in theater. I acted and danced. I remember I had a 2-show day. I couldn't even breathe, and I was struggling dancing and singing, but I was going to get through the show, and my mother was up in my dressing room with my nebulizer. So between shows, I was doing that. So I've kind of always fought through with the asthma. But asthma is a very serious chronic condition. I don't like to think about it often, and I don't have to generally, although this spring has really kind of knocked me for a loop a bit. I've had to up medications because I wasn't clearing, and something was bothering me, but we think it was all sort of this sinus ear kind of thing. And you name it, I have every comorbid condition pretty much except for the obesity and sleep apnea, but I do have GERD and sinusitis, and the nasal polyps. So asthma is just kind of part of who I am, but it's why I became so involved in the community was because, and I wanted to be an educator, was because when I was teaching in the city, I saw so many kids with asthma, and it wasn't understood, and it wasn't taken as serious. And, I also wanted kids with asthma to know that they could do anything. One of the things, once my asthma got better under control, one of the things I did do in high school, sports-wise, was swimming. I was swimming all the time. Every day in school, I went swimming. And it was great for me. But, just like anything else, asthma needs to be stayed on top of, and it needs to be respected. And, whenever I see a sign or a symptom, I can't panic anymore, which I used to panic, but I have to stay on top of it. But my message to people this May about asthma awareness is that asthma affects everyone, and it doesn't discriminate, and the key is to getting it under control so that your life is not totally impacted by it. And we're so lucky with the advancements in medication. This is what I have to say. Between the new biologics that are in the market, which is fascinating to me because I wish they had that 30 years ago, to the different inhalated steroids that are on the market now, to the newer class of drugs that are being cross-used for COPD and asthma. It's just, we are so lucky that we have these medical breakthroughs to make asthma more manageable. But it's really important that if you're a child or you have asthma, to really, really work with your doctor and create a plan and tell them your signs and symptoms. If you're waking up in the middle of the night coughing once or twice a week, you don't have good control. If you're not, being active and you're getting out of breath, that's not good control. So it's really important that you work with your doctor and that asthma is understood. And in my next video, I will talk about asthma and food allergies. With that, have a great day. Bye.